floated the economy. This was the carry trade. And in the recent 2004 FOMC transcripts that were released, and I just wrote about them on my blog, there was a comment by Greenspan about we created the carry trade in order to do, which I never would have suspected that government bureaucracy would be that innovative to create the carry trade. This was the first time a recovery in the U.S. was driven by finance rather than production. Money and credit were concentrated more and more in the hands of the slick and the clever, who had nearly unlimited access to more and more financing. By now, the middle class was getting trounced. From that point forward, every time the economy coughed, Greenspan cut rates and pumped up the bubble. Loose money attracts characters who should never be handling money. And the economy had become badly unbalanced. And between 1993 and 1996, Federal Reserve Governor Larry Lindsey, at every meeting, gave a lecture on how the American people were falling behind. They didn't even understand what he was talking about. Somebody had mentioned Janet Yellen before. At one point, when he gave one of these talks about how the American consumer is falling behind, spending too much more than their income, and then the next thing she said was, "Well, I'm afraid that the savings rate has gone up too high, so that could put a damper on the recovery." And it's just a completely different language. In any case. I just call this was his goodbye talk in 1996 when, and I'll quote Mr. Lindsey and then Mr. Greenspan, "Mr. Lindsey, our luck is about to run out in the financial markets because of what I would consider a gambler's curse. We have won this long. Let us keep the money on the table. But the long-term costs of a bubble to the economy and society are potentially great. They include a reduction in the long-term savings rate, a seemingly random redistribution of wealth, and the diversion of scarce capital into the acquisition of wealth. I think it is far better that we burst the stock market bubble while the bubble still resembles surface froth and before the bubble carries the economy to stratospheric heights. Whenever we do it, it is going to be painful, however. If the optimists are wrong, then indeed not only our luck, but that of the markets and of the economy has run out. Thank you, Chairman Greenspan." On that note, we can all go for coffee. And so, for the next 10 years, Greenspan sat there and drank his coffee and blew up bubbles in the stock market and the credit markets and housing markets and every market. And the sorts of characters who were taking charge were more and more of a persuasion that you wouldn't want to have this sort of person fill your gas tank. Now, in 2001, David Tice, before the House Finance Services Committee, said the most reckless fund managers, the most reckless auditors, the most reckless investment bankers, the most reckless corporate officers made the most money. So you had greater and greater incentives to promote the most reckless guys. And that was in 2001. And wonder why this crowd who ran us over the cliff in 2008 was another generation after that. But the worst racketeers in the country had gravitated to the Federal Reserve Board. To prevent the economy from collapsing, they rigged more markets than the Politburo. And this is clear in the 2004 FOMC transcripts. And I'll quote one, which is Federal Reserve Governor Donald Cohn. And in the March meeting, he said, "Policy accommodation and the expectation that it will persist is distorting asset prices. Most of the distortion is deliberate and a desirable effect of the stance of our policy. We have attempted to lower interest rates below long-term equilibrium rates and to boost asset prices." In other words, the Federal Reserve policy was to distort asset prices. He also said this was deliberate and that it was desirable. In other words, this wasn't just a side effect of such and such Fed policy. This was the policy. Cohn went on, "It's hard to escape the suspicion that at least around the margin, some prices and price relationships have gone beyond an economically justified response to easy money. House prices fall into this category." So note, the Fed was deliberately driving up the prices of houses above what would be the proper market price. Now, I wrote about this, as I say, about the 2004 transcripts recently on my blog, and the character of these transcripts was completely different than I've read them all the way back to 1994. Now they were managing the carry trade. They were trying to keep it at a certain size to be able to manage the level of long-term interest rates. And if you remember, Greenspan has been going on and on about how he couldn't do anything about the housing bubble because he had he didn't have any influence over long-term rates. I can tell you that they were at least attempting, and they did a pretty good job, in every meeting talking about tactics to manage the 10-year Treasury rate in order to keep it at a certain point. And then we read about Greenspan asking one of the Fed staffers whether the hedge funds are properly delta hedging the extension of the mortgages because of a change in interest rates. He said, this is not the Federal Reserve Board of even a couple of years before, where they just went on about their macro statistics. And you can see what happened with trying to manage all of these markets in 2004 and what happened, and then consider now what they're trying to manage and what will happen. So what is Fed policy today? Recently, the improvement in risk appetites, this is Donald Cohn in the fall of 2009. Recently, the improvement in risk appetites and financial conditions, in part responding to actions by the Federal Reserve and other authorities, has been a critical factor in allowing the economy to begin to move higher after a deep recession. Low market interest rates should continue to induce savers to diversify into riskier assets, which would contribute to a further reversal in the flight to liquidity and safety that has characterized the past few years. So again, they are trying to get people out of safe categories and into riskier assets. One reason for the Fed's zero-rate policy, and I can put this in the words of Henry C. Wallach, is a means by which the strong can more effectively exploit the weak. The strategically positioned and well-organized can gain at the expense of the unorganized and aged. The old cannot live on 0%. So the Fed has chased them into riskier assets. In conclusion, Chairman Greenspan was a Fiat chairman for a Fiat age. His credentials were inflated to serve a position of responsibility where he would justify that special confidence that Wall Street executives vouched for in 1983. Americans were beguiled by this fixture on television, who gained credibility simply because he was on television. Americans were also taken in by corrupt economists who were advertised as experts. They propelled a system that needed constant infusions of propaganda, convincing Americans they were getting richer even though they were getting poorer. By 2001, the slick and clever had to be the most reckless auditors and the most reckless investment bankers, since their dealings were divorced from any real economic benefit. Thus, the fundamental faith in the fairness of our institutions and of our government has deteriorated. Thank you.